So yes, my topic is applying project management to enable agile projects. A little bit of history. Over the last year or so, at Home Hardware, where I'm employed, we've started to employ agile in a rather big way, and it's really taking a foothold there. The thing I've noticed in the conferences and out the internet and the different places I read is there seems to be this tension between agile and project management. And as I got deeper into it, I started to realize, wait a minute, this is crazy. It's both things, both these two elements are trying to achieve the same thing. And so that's what my talk is about. And this is actually the third time I've done this in 3 weeks. I did it at an Agile conference in Toronto a couple weeks ago. I did it to a PMI group last week. That was an interesting one. Right? But, so let's get into it here. I am a PMP. Who else in the room is a PMP? Who else in the room is a project manager, program manager, manager of any kind? Excellent, good. The other designation I have is program management. It's a relatively new designation from PMI, and it's kind of one level up, and you'll see it as we go through here if you don't know what that is. So what I want to do during this presentation, I want to go through a number of things. First, I want to spend a little bit of time sharing my Agile journey. It actually stretches back some time, accidentally. But the more conscious part of the Agile journey, I think, is important. How many people were in Jeff's presentation right before this in this room? Quite a few of you. My part of the Agile journey in the last year actually incorporated some of Jeff and his teachings. But we'll get to that as we get a little further in. And then what I want to do is I want to talk about what the 5 benefits of project management is. Now, for the PMI people in the room, or the managers in the room, or anybody who thinks they know it, really what I want to talk about is the difference between applying all this PMI stuff effectively and how a lot of PMs do it. Okay, so I want to talk about those 2 things and the benefits that can bring to any project, whether or not it's run Agile. And then I want to start you on your path of examining, or how you examine and how you view project management. So first of all, as we get into this, and this will come out a little bit as I start to share my Agile journey, one of the key concepts that's important as we go through this whole presentation here, when I'm talking about Agile, I am not talking about a specific methodology. And that stems from the fact that Home Hardware, had I gone in and said, hey guys, guess what, I've got this better way to do it, we're going to use Scrum, we're going to use Agile, and we're going to, I would have been shot down pretty quick. Right? So what I had to do was actually take the existing methodology and break it down and use the Agile principles to start building it up again. And I'll start sharing that in a moment here. So, who am I? I've been at a number of places over the years. I've worked in a number of different sectors, all of them in IT or as a vendor or in-house and so on. Clerica, which became Sun Life, will be a part of this presentation, and Home Hardware is a part of this presentation. I've had many opportunities over my career. I actually feel very fortunate. The couple key pieces here is we have 7 years of applying Agile principles to projects. For those who are a PMP in the room, you may understand this. When I went to apply for my PMP, and it was like, oh, I need that many hours just to apply, and I started looking back, and I came to realize I had been doing project management for longer than I thought. Right? Same idea here. I took a look backwards and went, wait a minute, I've been employing this for a very long time. So let me share 2 Agile stories. The first one was when Clerica and Sun Life got together. And I don't know if you know much about Clerica, but Clerica was a large insurance, financial wealth company based in Waterloo. And they got bought by Sun Life. And at the time, I was a part of the investments division. And we had 2 systems in either company that had to be brought together to make one. And it was a very large program. It was about $4 million in total was my budget to work with. And we had a very fixed timeline. Public company, we're going to be integrated, we're going to be one company by this point. So off we went and we started. And I started in the first half of my program. There was really two distinct business divisions. And so we started in the first one and we grew this one incrementally over time. Somewhat of a waterfall, a lot of waterfall actually in amongst it, but we grew this project or set of projects over time. And all the time I'm going, well, what about the second part? What about the second part? If we don't start it, we're not gonna hit the deadline. You know, I was doing that PM thing, watching a calendar. And then finally, at one point, management came to me and said, hey Mike, you know how you've been bugging us about starting that? We actually need it done in 3.5 months. And it was worth about $2 million. Anybody else been in this kind of position? Yeah, I was seeing some head nodding, so it was very green. Highly visible if we failed. It would be visible in the stock market. That's how visible it was. And here's what happened. My VP, I sat down with her and I said, okay, Carmen, here's all the things that are the reason why we can't do it in 3.5 months. And she took off her glasses, which she did for a fact. Took them off, put them down on the table, and she says, Mike, stop telling me why you can't do this, start telling me what you need. I said, okay, I'm gonna need 25 people. I'm gonna need 20 people contract and our core team of 5. She says, okay, done. And I'm gonna need them next week. She said, done. She actually did deliver that too, some pretty high quality people. And then she got us this war room, because that was the next thing I said. And yes, it was as crowded as it looked. We had 30-inch desks, we were one after the other. We get in there and it's like, oh my God, this is crowded. But you deal with it. You're only gonna be there for a few months. And these are just tables out the center. And then the most incredible thing happened. We started working, and more importantly, we started talking. And it was the coolest thing. Somebody across the room would say something, and 3 other people would go, wait a minute, I know something about that. Right? And they would get together, they would collaborate right there in the center of the room or across the room, and all of a sudden the problem was solved in 5 minutes and on it went. Problems like that I've seen go on for months and months, or weeks, or hours, or whatever. Very, very collaborative type of environment. Of course, it also meant if you got personal phone calls, everybody knew about those too. Actually, there was one, it was really quite funny because she got a phone call from her one son, and you could see she didn't want to say it. And all of a sudden she said, I can't remember the son's name, Joe, I don't care what he did, you can't hit your brother with a stick. And then she went a little further, and she got really quiet. Of course, we're all listening intently. And she goes, I love you too. He pulled out the trump card, it was cool. Anyway, so very open, very collaborative kind of environment. The result, keep in mind, $2 million budget. We delivered on the exact date we said we would, with the scope we needed. You know, this wasn't one of those where we traded off scope. We didn't have a lot of options. And we're $8,000 under budget. I like the 8,000 under it. It's almost spot on 2 million. So why was it successful? And yeah, I've used the word accidentally. You know, this was after the manifesto was written, but it's not like I went out and read the manifesto, right? But we accidentally embraced those principles. That really, really high amount of collaboration, face-to-face communication. Business people were with us continually, right? The ability to turn around and ask a question. All the things that prove to us that it makes sense to go agile. So let me go to my second example. This one happened about a year ago, a little under a year ago now. This was one at Home Hardware. Now, I don't know how much you know about Home Hardware. We're a dealer-owned company, so it's not a franchise. The dealers actually buy into corporate to become a dealer. They actually hold private shares, might be the way to think about it. We've grown up in a little town of St. Jacobs, which is just north of Kitchener-Waterloo, which is about an hour west of Toronto. Right? So it's a little tiny village. And it's kind of the coolest thing when you see this big transport coming out of there heading for wherever it's going. and it's the small little street it's coming out of. And if you don't stop for it, he can't get out to the main road, right? So there's huge corporations built up inside there. Very collaborative kind of environment, one where we really care about people. However, like so many IT shops, we got people doing 10 things at once. Multitasking is probably one of the biggest problems that happens there. Low collaboration, believe it or not. There's a lot of things going on which are driving us towards inefficiency. So about 2 years ago, I started looking at this and saying, okay, this is crazy. This is just nuts because it takes us forever to deliver something, and is that something valuable to the business? So as a part of looking at that, I started looking at this thing called Agile, more formally, and actually came to this conference last year. That was my first formal, education, I guess you could call it, into Agile. Went back and set out to do this project here. The project was really quite simple. Right? It was about 1,000 hours, which is not much, but it was the perfect project to pilot Agile with. It was low profile, it was easy to get buy-in to it, right? And I had a customer who was more than willing to come to the table and be involved with this all the time. Very important. So then I looked back at past projects and I said, okay, let's look at history here. What does history tell me? For example, when I found a project where it was about a similar project, the BA had spent about 4 months building requirements. Think pure waterfall. Here's the thing though, 4 months duration, 6 hours a week. Right? Talk about inefficiency. So I said, okay, what if we compress that down? And what if we remove that factor for multitasking? Well, what I ended up with was a very simple project. Now this is an end state. I wish I had a picture at the beginning of it. A very simple project. And I said, let's not take them outside of their comfort zone. So the very first thing I did is told the team, we're not going Agile. We're going to do lean. Right? So I used different words with them. And what I started with here, actually, was to continue using, and I know you can't read these back there, but business requirements, design, development, testing, and so on. And I created a mini waterfall. Now, I've heard other people talk about this. And at the start of it, I had 2 iterations. 2 weeks for requirements, 2 weeks for development, 2 weeks for, design, development, and so on. So I had 2 8-week iterations, which if you read, Scrum theory, those are big. Right? But you have to keep in mind, if I said the word Agile or if I tried to drag them there too quick, I was going to get resistance. So then we started off. And I gave them this model to work with, this little waterfall that they felt really comfortable with. And we started off into here, and these columns represent weeks. And I'm project manager, I needed a Gantt chart, right? The stickies represented the Gantt. And as we started off, let me get rid of the arrows here. At this end of it, I had to really hold the team's hand, right? It was like, okay, so what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it, right? And so, for example, they started stressing about how are we going to get into iteration 2? I said, I don't know. We'll figure that out together when we get there. And it was incredible. That's exactly what happened. Partway through development of the first iteration, we're all standing in our morning stand-up, and we actually all stood around this board here. This is actually probably about 8 feet wide, this thing was. But we all stood around there. That was our focal point. And as we're standing there talking, the developer said something about, well, there's one character in that field. And one of our business users went, wait a minute, 1 character, we need 3. And I'm like, right, because historically, something like that would really, really harm the project. But the most incredible thing happened, we dealt with it. Okay, so if instead of passing it over to the DBA and waiting for them to make the change, let's tweak the development environment and send the request and keep going. They got creative. It was really cool to see. Partway through the first iteration, remember I started with 2, but now I've got 3. Partway through the first iteration, the business said to me, hey Mike, what we'd really like in the next iteration is just a really small piece. We don't want something big, because that one little piece is high risk. And I went, oh great, that's not gonna work because we have this constraint and this constraint. But then I opened it up to the team. I said, how can we make this happen? And they made it happen. We inserted a second iteration, or a third iteration, I guess, in between. And then things started getting even more interesting. Because if you look here, this is requirements, design, development, and testing. A real thing happened. They, my team, threw away the waterfall. They stacked it, right? And it just started naturally happening. At the start of the project, 3 weeks in, we had our first delivery. Now, it was in a test region, and it was in the form of a demo. But it was with the business, and we let them drive and give us feedback right then and there. Every single week after there, at least once a week, we delivered something to the business. In the third iteration, we were delivering to user acceptance every 2 days. So you think of some of the things I was saying about where we came from to where we ended up, a huge, huge difference. Okay, so I don't think there's anything I need to reiterate here. Yeah, probably the biggest thing I would reiterate is the first set of points there. I didn't have broad support. I still don't have broad support. Almost a year later, I don't have broad support. But what I do have is a very strong foothold. So go out and get the foothold and make use of it, right? Start building up those successes, okay? 2 things that were important to me. One is I didn't try to boil the ocean, right? Remember, I didn't go in and say, hey, we're going to Scrum and we're going to do all, right? Keep it simple. Don't take them out of their comfort zone. Find a balance. The second one was to ensure I had top-down support. So I actually pulled in the VP and the directors and I walked them through what I was about to do. My analogy that I like to use for this one is actually a joke. Do you know what the redneck said just before he drove off the road? Here, open mirror, I want to try something. Right? That kind of thing. Right? Trust me, I just want to try something. And they did. Okay. So a common question I've heard, especially in the Agile community that I've participated in the last year and a half, a common question I've heard is, do we need a project manager on Agile projects? In the ideal world, no. Wouldn't need any managers, right? Wouldn't that be ideal? Everybody just knew what to do. They knew how much budget they had, they knew who to interact with, they knew how to collaborate, and it just happened in this flat organization. That'd be cool. But the world is not ideal. I actually picked this up off a discussion I was in on LinkedIn. Right? It's not the ideal world. Right? It's not how it works. So, in your organization, you might be able to give me argument of why you could work without a project manager. And I would accept that, without question. In a lot of organizations, there is so much going on. What project managers can help with is to bring a little bit of alignment. Sorry, I was trying to think of the right word there, which we'll get to in a second. So as we go forward through this, keep that in mind. Tailor this to your organization. So a project manager, what are we? We're a specialist. We have developers who are specialists. We have BAs who are specialists. Right? We're a specialist in managing the business of running a project. You compare it to a few different things. The sports team coach, right? Somebody to inspire, somebody to lead, somebody to give vision, somebody to have a strategy, somebody to keep an eye on the enemy or the opposing teams. A financial advisor, right? Personally, I don't have a whole lot of spare time that I can spend the time to truly understand how the financial market works, so I count on an advisor. Same kind of thing. Right? Count on somebody who knows how to manage. And then a doctor. And the doctor one I really struggled with if I could make this one work. But it comes down to, I go in to see my doctor. My doctor's often asking me, so what do you think, Mike? Right? And he might prescribe something, but if I don't take it, right, it could be detrimental. Right? So it's a partner. It's a partnership. An effective project manager will handle the IT investment as a good steward. How many people work for medium to large corporations that have senior management kind of structures? Yeah, so quite a few of us. So senior management is taking a look at all of the different things they could invest in, and they've decided to invest in Project X. Right? What we need to do as managers is to be good stewards with their money, to make sure it's spent really wisely. PMI took a look at the value of project management. They did a worldwide study. Right? They had a PhD and a number of project managers involved with this. And the results of it are actually documented quite well in this 300-page book. If you ever have insomnia, be excellent. What I want to draw on is just a summary from their PowerPoints. And what I found interesting in here is PMI themselves are saying we need to be agile. Now, if you're coming from a different discipline, I believe the same thing applies. If you're a BA and you look towards IIBA, right, I think the same thing applies. When you think about PMI, if you don't know their history, it's actually rooted in engineering and construction. It is not rooted in software development. So more of an industrial process is where they come from. As IT, we grabbed onto it because things were going so bad, we needed something better, and here was structure. Right? The problem is how people have applied it. Right? But the value tends to be around things which, for me, define what Agile means. Communication, effective decision-making, effective working culture, so on and so forth. Right? These are the things that I think really help us stand out, help us manage better. Have the case study organizations demonstrate tangible value. I'm not surprised by that. I find it really, really difficult to calculate ROI in software. Sure, if you're a software house and you're going to put out a shrink wrap box on the shelf, you probably have an easier time than I do. But if I go to my business inside of a large enterprise and say, what's this piece of software worth to you? What value does it have? Give me a dollar figure. How do you come up with that? It's difficult, right? So same with project management. Very difficult to come up with a tangible value. Oh, I got a good schedule. That save us $100 or $1,000? Not sure. The other one I really liked in here, where value is being sustained and continuing to grow, there is ongoing focus and improvement underway. The act of not enhancing value appears to destroy value. It's at the bottom. I thought I'd better read it because I'm sitting back there for Jeff's. So I know you guys can't see the bottom. Right? It destroys value. That's right in the manifesto, in the principles. Right? Continually learn, continue to improve. Other thoughts? Is PMI contemplating an Agile PM certification? I got a survey about 3-4 months ago now, and it was quite interesting because I wish I would have captured it, but if I was to put questions up here, I think every single person in the room would go, yeah, they're thinking about an Agile certification. Will I take it? I don't know. Taking the PGMP was stressful enough. I don't know if I want to do that again. They have an Agile community of practice, which has become very active. Party going on next door. Active PM Agile discussions and forums. Like, there's so much going on out there. People are starting to recognize project management alone, as defined by PMI, is not enough. And it's because how people are interpreting it. So let's talk about the 5 benefits of project management. Before I get into that, this is a very important concept. What is value to your customer? How many people here think their customers want to work with them? Want to spend time working with IT? Yeah, I'm really glad to see that. It was interesting to see the Toronto Agile Conference, nobody put up their hand. Here, nobody's put up their hand. The PMI one, I had about 50 people in the room, and probably about 20 of them put their hand up. It was really quite interesting, right? Interesting trend. So, of course, our customers do not want to work with IT. Accountants don't get up every morning and go, boy, I really want to go work with IT today. Pretty sure they're saying something opposite to that, right? They just want to meet their business objectives, right? We're a necessary partner to provide them the tools. Okay, so why did I put this here? It's because I think it's an underlying concept. It's a thing, a concept, a belief, a behavior that I believe a lot of managers and project managers have lost sight of. What's important to our customer, right? I think this is the underlying cause of a lot of the PM horror stories they hear out there. The command and control type, the ones that develop really, really thick documents. And right within the principles of Agile, right, working software is the primary measure of success. You should have seen the PMs last week when I said, because what I tacked on to the end of that one is your schedules don't help your customer. Right? Half of them were like, what? It was quite interesting. So, benefit number one. Now I've got 5 benefits in here. These are the ones that I believe are the top 5. Could there be more? Absolutely. We'll have some room for discussion at the end, right? Stop me as we go through if you think there's something else, right? But we can certainly expand on. So maintaining organizational alignment. Every company has it, or most companies should have a vision, mission, and strategy stated, right? And this is all about making sure that your company is doing what it's set out to do. Making sure it stays aligned to the market, making sure it keeps an eye on the competitors, so on and so forth. Okay? Our job as managers and as good IT people is to make sure we stay aligned to it. Because if we don't, we could create a problem for the company. We could waste our money. We could be doing the wrong thing. So what project management brings for us, first of all, is project portfolio management. So think of portfolios like a financial portfolio. Management has a finite resource to work with, called IT, and they have to decide where they're going to invest. Right? So they take all their money and they divvy it up into the portfolio. And then what we use is a couple more disciplines, programs and projects. Think of programs as a collection of projects. Right? That's probably the quickest way to describe that. They use these other 2 management techniques in order to execute on the portfolio. Our job as managers, project managers, portfolio managers, program managers, is to stay aligned. And there's a couple really good examples of where this can become a problem. They're a little higher level, but they're great examples. Probably 20 years ago now, I started visiting friends, or we developed friends, just south of Rochester, New York, which is just kind of right below Lake Ontario, right in the middle, straight across from Toronto. Rochester had this huge company in it called Kodak. Right? Kodak, if you think back to when we were kids, you went into the local store, yeah, there were other films there. Well, what was the predominant film? It was Kodak, right? All the yellow boxes. Kodachrome, did a little bit of research on it. They had this huge trademark, you know, they were very secretive of Kodachrome. That was their trade secret, right? So Kodak's going along, and they're not paying attention. And what happened? The whole market went digital. Rochester is fairly hard hit because Kodak has gone from this huge, huge employer in Rochester down to one little plant. Right? Very hard hit. That's a large-scale example, but same kind of thing can happen here. If I embark on a project or a program that's going to take me a year, and I don't continue to pay attention to the vision, mission, and strategy, I could go zooming by a change and just wasted $1 million, $2 million, whatever. So, key value proposition of a PM, keep the project aligned. Up and down the triangle that's up there. The mistake that I see way too many PMs do, right? Is they check it at the start of the project and off they go, right? What should be happening is the PM should always be keeping an eye on the vision, mission, strategy statement and what's going on in the project. Benefit number 2, a common set of tools and best practices. So PMI gives us a framework, and I won't go through this. It's exactly what the words said. Oh, lost your keys. It's exactly what the words say, right? They give us a good framework to work within. One of the things that I see happening is a lot of PMs think that between execute and monitor and control, we're going to iterate, right? We're going to go in the cycle. What PMI actually says to do is cycle between planning and execution. Sounds kind of agile to me. Unfortunately, too many PMs think this is the model. Plan once and then go to the end, right? Using this kind of thing, we initiate, we cut a charter, we define what it is we're trying to accomplish. We go through the planning execution cycle, and finally when we're done, we close. The whole time, right from the very beginning to right to the very end, we're going to monitor and control it. We're going to pay attention to what's going on. We're going to be that good steward. The mistake that I see a lot of PMs making as well is they act as if the PM body of knowledge, PMBOK, is the Bible. It's a checklist. What really doesn't help is PMI has an audit out there that measures your project management maturity, called OPM3, and that's exactly what it does. You go through loads and loads and loads of questions to get to the point they have a check mark. But is it being effective? Think in terms of the Agile Manifesto. I delivered a communication plan. Is that important? No. Delivering something value is what's important. Right in the PMBOK guide itself, right, it says most of the projects, most of the time, should not be used uniformly. It's a mistake people keep making. They don't read this part of PMBOK, and it's not that big. It's like one paragraph out of 300 pages, right? But that's a mistake that people keep making. So project managers tend to take PMBOK and think it's prescribed. Anybody know a PM that does that? Probably quite a few, yeah. Unfortunately, I was guilty of it at one time too, so. There's other agile concepts in PMBOK. Progressive elaboration, right? It's the rolling wave type of planning. Managing change, prototypes. There's lots of things right within the PMI domain that says we need to be agile. We bring a common framework forward to work with, but it's a framework. Benefit number 3, managing our customer needs and expectations. After all, that's why we're here as IT. Right? Our customers have a need. They don't want to work with us, but they need us. Right? So we have a number of tools within the framework that help us with this. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these. Right? But we have the charter, scope, requirements, so on and so forth. The mistake, this is coming right from Agile, right? I heard it last year from Mary Popnick as well. The mistake I see a lot of PMs making, and BAs making, and designers making, is thinking our customers can define exactly what they want in detail at the start of the project. So, scope statement. So I'll use one piece of the entire managing the needs here. Scope statement. I used to cut what I thought was really, really good scope statements. Detailed, in scope, out of scope, what's unresolved. If you can't read the little words, it just says blah, blah, blah. What it should have said. Right? And I thought, man, have I got it nailed? Here we go. When I look back in hindsight, what in fact happened is I would detail things out and think, now we know exactly what to deliver. But by the time my project was done, I had executed so many change requests, it didn't even begin to look like this. Right? So is that true success? We wasted a lot of churn. So in the home hardware example I had earlier, here's my scope statement. Now, something I confessed to my team at the end, I didn't confess this at the beginning, is managing in this manner scared the hell out of me, right? Because I'm a PM. I've been doing this for 10 years. I'm used to this kind of detail. How on earth am I going to control things with this little bit of detail, right? So very simple scope statement. Really what we're doing, create a product handling indicator. So anybody who places a claim for a product, one of the dealers, we just want to know what happened to that product. Did they scrap it out there? Did it come back to the warehouse? Did it go to the vendor? You know, whatever. So we wanted this indicator. Really a simple change. So I picked up this technique off a presentation Alan Shalloway had done with Net Objectives. And at the slides are going to be posted on the website afterwards, or at least I think they are. And certainly if you leave them your business card, I can send them to you. But I have a link at the end of his webinar. But I picked this concept up from him. And it works like this. So we start with the scope statement. The simple scope statement was there. And these were actually flip chart papers. My picture didn't have them, and they're kind of around the corner, so to say. Well, we started with 4 flip charts, and we called them front burner, back burner, fridge, and freezer. Think of cooking. Front burner is typically the things you're working on right now, current iteration. Back burner, kind of warming them up, getting them ready for the next iteration. Fridge, the things that are in temporary storage that I may or may not pull out and put onto the stove. And freezer is my long-term storage. In the context of a project, don't know if we'll ever get to those features. So then I got the team together, and I said, okay. And I said this to the business, and they got all excited, right? Because they're so used to us saying, out of scope, out of scope, out of scope. But I said, you can do whatever you want with the fridge. Put things on, take them off, and they're like, really? Yeah. Right? So they put a whole bunch of stickies up here. And then what I did with the team is I said, and these were all user stories. If you were in Jeff Patton's presentation prior to this one, these were the user stories. We picked this up from Jeff. And then we got the team together and we said, okay, we know what the constraints in the front burner are. You know, in the project management world, we had our iron triangle. We had a fixed set of constraints to work with. What could we do in this period of time? So we brought the whole team together and I said, okay, let's start going through this. And so we stood up. Oh, actually, it was kind of funny. I said, yeah, come on, let's stand up. They weren't used to that, right? But I got them to stand and actually interact with this paper on the wall. And then as we were doing this, we thought, okay, here's the 5 things that could be here, and it wasn't anywhere near this neat. And then as we got a little bit further, we realized something couldn't fit into the front burner constraints, so we moved them to the back burner. Right? And then more things got moved to the back burner as we start planning the next iteration. And then over time, things started hitting the freezer. Here's the interesting thing. I'm transitioning from a traditional waterfall type of thought process to more of an agile concept of we have time boxes to work with. I didn't think things would actually hit the freezer. There actually were. There was quite a bit in the freezer when we were done. And the business had their closing comments to the project was we exceeded their expectation. They didn't think this was going to work. So we had all kinds of things we didn't do for them, and yet we still exceeded their expectation. What this tool gave me, this tool right here, right, comes right out of the principles, was the ability to deal with changing requirements on the fly. You know, that field going from 1 to 3 characters, we could deal with it. Right, as a team. It was another focal point for us. Benefit number 4, managing organizational constraints. I'm talking about finances, people, schedules, you know, if you got some kind of deadline looming out there, right? That's another thing that PMs bring to the table. Unfortunately, a lot of PMs put this way up high on the list of things that need to be dealt with. It's important, I just don't know that it's up that high. The mistake they make, they think they can actually predict the future. I've been there. Right? I thought, yeah, man, I can schedule this and I can work this tool and I can tell you exactly when things are going to happen. So let me tell you a little story. And it happened back when I worked for NavTech. Navtech was a software company in Waterloo, a flight planning provider. They're not the Navtech you see in the mapping software through Google or wherever they show up. But there was this other guy there by the name of Mike, an older gentleman, and he started his career as a navigator in the Canadian Forces, flying in C-130s, all over the world. And he told me this story once, and I didn't really click into it at the time. But when they're crossing the Atlantic, first time he's navigating across the Atlantic, the way the Atlantic works and the Pacific is there's tracks. They're at latitudes, degrees of latitude, and they have to keep 2,000 feet of separation if you're going this way versus this way. And you can only drift so far left and right off of the latitude. Right? So they enter a track as they're going out over the ocean, and then they stay on that all the way across. Well, the pilot came back, and he says, "Hey, Mike, where are we?" Mike said, "Well, no, we're somewhere," he did that over the map, "somewhere in a circle like that." The pilot just reamed him out. He said, "What? What do you mean? You don't know where we are? What is wrong with you?" And he, just whatever. He just got really angry with him, and the pilot went away. And about an hour later, the pilot came back, and he said the exact same thing. "Hey, Mike, where are we?" And Mike went, "Right there." So the lesson in there, which I'm taking and applying, is even though Mike said we're right there, the best he could know is that we're here. And in our projects, because we work in knowledge-based work, right, not an industrial process, that's probably the best we can do. But much like Mike navigating across the Atlantic, there's things in place which protect us, that's acceptable. We don't need to know that we're right there on the map. So let's tie that back to project management. Anybody seen a schedule that looks something like this? Very complex. I actually blurred it on purpose because last week the PM who owned that schedule was in the room. So I didn't want to embarrass him. But I've done these too. And I created a schedule once. It was a large integration project I was doing for Sun Life. And every morning, Kitchener is about an hour from Toronto, I'd hop on the train, and I'd take the train to Toronto. And I took the train so I could sit there for an hour working on my schedule. And I think it was about 600-700 lines of schedule. And every morning I'd get there and say, okay, I know exactly what's going to be going on. It's all an illusion. So let's go back to this schedule. I have to say that I have never felt so in control of a project as I did this time. And in hindsight, when I look back at it, it's because it was our rallying point. I motivated the individuals, and every day we stood around here, and all this writing here is our journal. Right? So as we go along, things would happen, we'd write it down. Right? We got, something came at us from that field, we'd write it down. There's even one up here somewhere, our sponsor had a baby born, somewhere up here it's written down as well. Right? We celebrated, we wrote it down. Anything we did, we wrote it down. I didn't know why at the time, but it actually increased the collaboration. It gave them something to go back and point at, right? Gave us a focal point to work with. The other part about predicting the future is PMs are really good at creating charts. Now, performance monitoring is always a difficult one. Who's heard of something called earned value? Last week when I was with the PMs, I asked them, okay, who here knows what earned value is? And of course everybody put their hand up, and I said, okay, who here executes it in their environment? And a few of them left their hands up. And then I said, okay, who here thinks they've got control of the project because they're using it? And all their hands went down. And I think what it was is that they tend to overcomplicate it. I was at a presentation here on yesterday, right? And I saw a great tool that I think expands on how a PM does it, right? I think there's great potential there. What I did was to say there was two things that were important to me. I know what I expect people to be doing today. So what are they doing? And the other thing that was important to me is projecting out where I think I'm going to end up. I would like to have that tool. Because this was Excel and a little bit more painful, right? So what this is showing me here, these red lines represent actual time logged. This is what I expected from them. So if I'd see a gap here, I'd be like, what's going on? Well, we had this issue and that issue and so on. Were the numbers really important? No. What they were was just a health indicator for me as a PM to be able to look at. The other one is to look at where we're going to head. Now behind this is actually earned value. The problem I have with earned value, this is my opinion on it, the problem with earned value is people don't understand it. So I go in and I say, we've got a cost variance, we got a schedule variance, or whatever. They just don't get it. So all I did, change the labels. And they went, oh, okay, same concept though. What it allowed me to do was project out where I thought we were going to end up. Here's my budget. The yellow was projected, the blue is actual. And it actually turned out to be very accurate. More importantly, what it did allow me to do as well was to look beyond where I expected things to end. So I believe this iteration actually ended somewhere in here. What if we kept going? What impact would that have, right? Benefit number 5, providing leadership. HR skills, team motivation, collaboration, communication, all those kinds of things. I really struggled with how to label this one, but it's something that I've really become to believe in quite strongly. And it's something that sets apart a good PM from a great PM. A good PM will be really good at collecting information, collecting data, cutting a schedule, tracking actuals, doing all those kinds of things. A great PM takes those things, great, we have to use them, we need those, but also adds leadership. Take everything we learn here, right, at an Agile conference, all those people things, it's a common thread, right, and apply them accordingly. The mistake, right, of course, is the command and control. I've been there, the micromanagement, right? The thing, I can't remember who I was talking to. I heard somebody talking throughout this conference about struggles with the PM, right? Who's very much command and control, doesn't want to admit they're wrong. I think what you have to do is find a way to hold up the mirror, right? See if they can see for themselves whether they're micromanaging, if they're in this command and control kind of mode, right? And what value does that provide? Probably one of the greatest things I did for a developer was a developer, she's about so tall, right? A meets person. She's from India, and so I believe there's a cultural thing there too, right? Male versus female, right? And she was always a quiet person in the corner. Well, one of the things I did for her was to bring her into my team as an equal. I brought everybody in as an equal. This was my work chair. I'm used to the hierarchical kind of work chair. But I brought her in as an equal, and what really lit her up, really lit that spark for her, is I said, Jyoti, honestly, you're the only person in this team that delivers value to the customer. The rest of us are here to support you. I'm here as a manager to support you. She lit right up. What a difference that made. The benefits of this kind of organization are just tremendous. Right? By bringing everybody in as an equal. I wouldn't care if we had the admin assistant as a part of the team, she would be an equal with an equal voice. Everybody has to be equal, right? It's something that I hear over and over again in Agile circles. The things it really did for us, finding that defect early, 1 versus 3 characters. It allowed us to figure out how to get that second iteration stuck between, right? So on and so forth. The other big one, we're extremely process laden at home hardware. It's changing, it's shifting. I've got a foothold with Agile now, right? But it reduced the need for all this heavy documentation. Because what we would do is the BA would do their job and throw the book over the wall. SA would do their job, and then including detailed module specs, telling a developer exactly what they need to code. What we did was to eliminate a lot of that. And in fact, what we're doing in these teams now, we don't do module specs before, we do them after. The support still needs them. But instead of guessing what we're going to develop, we know what was developed, so it's really easy to do, really inexpensive. Hopefully I don't need to tell anyone in the room this, right? Best collaboration technique is face-to-face. If you do not employ stand-up meetings, and I did not up to a year ago, do it. Go after it, figure it out, find a way to do it. It's important though, and I'm having to continually put guardrails up around my PMs, right? Keep them in line, but it's important to make sure it's 15 minutes and it's stand up, right? It keeps it focused, keep it quick. If you're gonna be in there every single day, the last thing people need is an hour. Right? Keep it focused. There's a great article by Martin Fowler on stand-ups, or you can just Google stand-up meetings, you'll find them. There's lots out there. The other part of leadership is learning. So I had to really create an environment for people to learn. And it was difficult, right? Because it's not an environment that people are used to at home hardware and IT. Right? Here's your process, go do it. I had to break that down and give them an environment to learn with it, and give them the leadership to be able to do it. So I found this thing. It was actually somebody had passed it over to me. A gentleman by the name of Jim McCarthy, who used to work for Microsoft. He was the guy that actually headed up the Visual C++ division, is the one who came up with this. And it's called the perfection game. We do this every week. The team gets together. And there's only 3 things we need to worry about. And it's really quite quick. Somebody comes up to the board, hopefully it isn't right that big, right? But they write up, first of all, what was great with this week? What do they really like about this week? You know, whatever it is. And then they write a score. The whole idea here is try to hit 10. On a scale of 1 to 10, we want to try to hit 10. You don't track it week to week, it's not a trending thing, it's a point in time. Probably the only trend that's important, where are we this week relative to last? Not the last 20, just last. Okay? And it's really interesting to watch, because in a bad week, this number will drop, and then they'll have a good week and they'll scoot right back up to 8s, 9s, and 10s. Okay? And it's a personal opinion, right? It's no science behind it, it's very subjective. What are you feeling like? And then finally, if you don't put a 10 there, what would it take to make it a 10? What would have to change? Right? Well, we'd have to go to daily builds. We'd have to reduce our dependency on email, so on and so forth. At the end of it, and here's the key, the team, everybody who's participating comes up and they get 3 votes. And so they put check marks on the whiteboard and say, you know, I like this one and so on, right? And then the team takes the ones with the highest number of votes, because those are the most important ones, and puts them into the backlog and improves in the coming week. You know, so if we want to move towards daily builds, you know, what are we going to do about that? Well, maybe we do something in next week while we're a little closer, but it's still there, it's still a problem. You know, whatever the case may be. So, in summary, is there value of having a PM on a project? Yes, absolutely. You know, it's that alignment with the organization. Is this project or is this program starting out and always staying in alignment with the organization? Right? There was, in the presentation yesterday on earned value, there was a lot of discussion about a kill point. Do we kill a project? I think it's something a lot of organizations don't do well. And despite our best efforts as managers, in illustrating why perhaps it should be killed, it still may not be. That's okay. We've done our job, we've made it visible, we've been a good steward. The most valuable PMs do act in alignment with the manifesto. All the PMs at Home Hardware now, I think all of them, have the manifesto and principles actually taped on the wall. Right? We're working in alignment with that. Have we made the leap to Scrum, or take your pick? No. Could we benefit from that? Probably. Right? But it's not the step we're at today. The study that PMI conducted, PMI themselves said, be agile. And there's evidence all over the place. PMBOK, the PMI Community of Practice. Will there be a PMI Agile certification? Who knows, maybe. The 5 benefits I talked about, managing that organizational alignment, the common set of tools and processes that we bring forward, managing our customer needs, making sure our projects deliver what the customer actually needs. That's everybody's job. But we have a tool to help with that. Managing the organizational constraints, they're the reality. We face them every single day. If we didn't have those, it would be easy and they wouldn't need us. I'd be okay with that. Providing leadership. Perhaps that one, I should have put it up as number 1. Leadership is very, very important. And it's one that I think a lot of PMs miss. Reference sites. So again, if you want the presentation, more than happy to share it. And finally, now this is something that came from a great event I had attended, an open space event in Waterloo called Agile Coach Camp. And we sat down and somebody had proposed a session called Is PMI Evil? And it was really cool. I had a slide with the diagram and I deleted it somehow. So we got over to where this open space was going to be. On the flip chart, what he had drawn was like 2 horns, devil-type horns, and PMI was the eyes, and there was these fangs and teeth, and it was eating Agile, right? The word Agile. It was really cool how he did it. But we went through this discussion, and we were debating, and there was a few Agilists there and a few PMIs there, PMIers there, and we were debating this whole thing. We went on for about 20 minutes or so, and finally it dawned on me, and I posed one single question that shut down the conversation. It was just this. I'm going to leave you with that thought. That's the end of my presentation. I'd like to thank you for your attention. Are there any questions? Please.
A few slides back, you mentioned about the documentation and reduce your documentation.
Yes.
Which is obviously a definite benefit that you can see from Agile.
Yes.
I'm in an organization that's just starting to dip our way in there. But we have a PMO that is pretty much PMI structured.
Yes.
We need these deliverables for this project, just like you're saying, that check mark.
Check.
So how did you manage that? I don't know if you have a PMO in your world, but how would you suggest managing that or starting to manage that shift to work with them to get some acceptance on that scoping back of physical things that you can check? I've got that document.
That's a really tough question. and the thing that makes it tough is I believe the answer to that question, if you didn't hear the question, was basically if you have a very strong PMO, right, how do we start the shift? How do we make the shift towards Agile and have their support and buy-in? Right? And there's a lot of it depends on this. Depends on your organization. I actually do have a PMO. There's the director of the PMO, there's the manager of the PMO. I'm his peer, the senior program manager, and all of the PMs report to the manager of the PMO.
That's
Same kind of
similar
situation?
concept.
Yeah. So the manager of the PMO is a very strong PMI person. Very, like, you'll talk to him about something and he'll rattle off PMBOK like that. Right? That kind of person. He's actually one of 93 OPM3 assessors in the world. Right? So he's very strong in this stuff and thinks, oh, we gotta have our check mark there. So the way I dealt with it was, first of all, don't threaten him. Right? Because if I had jumped in and said, hey, all this stuff's bad, let's squash it, let's throw it away, I would have immediately had resistance. So don't threaten them. Try to make them feel like you're partnering and that you're doing something that in fact is going to enhance what PMI brings forward. Right? Tough to do, without question. Then, collaboratively, what I've done is I've set up a series of what you could think of as open space. Right? It's for the PMs. I actually call it the PM Forum. It's once a week. It's an hour long. And what I did was to go to the manager and the director of the PMO, or the director, right, and say, I'd like your support to set up this form so that we can work on being better project managers. And what I've done over time through that form is influenced the thinking towards Agile. So my favorite example is a communication plan. PMI defines that as a good PM, I should create a communication plan that says who I'm going to communicate with, when I'm going to communicate with, how I'm going to communicate with. Home hardware may appear big. There's only about 120 people in corporate IT. It's only about 700 in corporate, right? Not counting the warehouse, but in the corporate office. We're not a big organization. Most times, the communication plan would be the same time after time after time. So why would we be creating it each time, right? The manager of the PMO is saying to me, but wait a minute, they have to look and create a communication plan every time. I let the PMs be the ones to actually influence that change of direction. Okay. Get them to do it, right? See if you can get support to have an open space kind of format, regular time. Somebody actually proposed to me, PMs should meet once a quarter for a day and have a full day open space go away and deal with it. It's evolutionary. You know, I don't know if I've really answered your question. It depends. Hopefully that helped. If you want to chat more, I'd be more than happy afterwards. Yeah.
I was going to say, just to participate in that dialogue, one thing I've always found useful is to ask somebody, why do you need this document? What information do you hope to achieve? When do you need it? And what's the bare minimum that will be acceptable to you? And then deliver that. Because I find a lot of times we make assumptions when someone says they want such and such a document. We already have a mental model, oh, this is what I need to do. Very often I find that when you actually start to have a conversation, you can actually get away with a lot less. And that's helpful for me.
Yes.
To that same discussion, I think that's sort of where the disconnect has always been between Agile and the PMI, is that for whatever reason, the Agile community seems to be a lot more common sense versus just prescriptive in terms of what the inbox says we should do. I think that's where
Yeah, and my thing lately is prescriptive, but PMI says we should do. PMI actually doesn't tell us to be prescriptive. It's how people interpret it. But your point's valid, absolutely, without question. Any other thoughts? I'm only one person here, so.
We initiated the first Agile project under Whitehall. We had all this big tech talk and all that stuff we had to do. We negotiated with the check to have these documents, but they were just skeleton documents, and that we would fill them in as we learned. So we, at the meeting where the project was going to give the A and A, we had all the documents and all the checkboxes, but the actual documents were either references to something or we'll do this when we figure it out. So that was how we got the permission to go and try the Agile. We had started with just the skeleton.
That's a good thought. Yeah, well, and that would also give, you know, the checkmark kind of people the comfort that, well, there's something there.
Yeah.
Right? And they're going to look at it, they're not ignoring it. Yeah, that's a good point.
I was working with a very large insurance organization, and we actually went through, there were 144 documents that you had to deliver in any project, right? And what we did is
You share the pain, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
So we actually brought the people that were auditing in, and also the people who defined the process, because they actually had separate groups, plus another group who did the QA. So there's 3 different groups. And have them be part of our first Agile training. We're not trying Agile yet, we're just gonna see what, let's do a couple days of thinking about it. And then the next thing that we did is we had them, well, why don't we talk about what it would be like in order to create a separate variation of the process. And of course, we'd love to go straight to Scrum, but that organization wasn't gonna happen tomorrow. And once we had this kind of skeleton of what we wanted, we also had another thing, which I thought was really important, which is they had a continuous improvement program already. And we started to leverage that. And one of the things that the process person said I thought was the best thing that could have come out is if we add one thing, we have to take away 6. And so everything that we do in our continuous improvement program, when we add one thing, it should be in as a result of streamlining our process. So we might remove 6 things in accordance with that. So that was their goal for the continuous improvement program.
That'd be a cool goal to have. Any other thoughts on the topic?
I'm just curious about your own PMO situation. I think another one of the problems that this discussion raises is the accountability for project success or failure. I think far too often, in the PMI sense, the project managers feel that they are solely accountable, whereas Agile tries to shift that accountability to the team.
Yes.
How is that working in your situation?
Oh, well. No. Have you heard of a gentleman by the name of Neil Whitten? Suggest you look him up. He has some of his, I find some of his concepts a little bit dated, like as we're shifting more and more towards Agile, I find a bit of a struggle there. But he talks about a lot of role and responsibility kind of things for projects. And in his one book where he talks about, the name of the book is escaping me. If you look for Neil Whitten, you'd know it by the title. It's something about organization of a project or something like that. And I really like his definition, and I've never let go of it, which is a project manager's accountability is the business of running a project. Right? The business. So schedule, resources, money, relationships, right? Communication, collaboration, all those things. That's what the PM is there for. The mistake that people slip into is they think, okay, this PM grew up through the technology world, right, to become a PM. Nobody ever left school when they were 20 and said, oh, I'm going to be a PM, right? That just doesn't happen, right? But they grew up and like myself, who started as a developer, right? They think, okay, I can design, I can be an architect, I can be all these things. It's not what they're accountable for, right? You need to make sure you have somebody who is responsible for what we deliver to the business, right? Or how we deliver it, and making sure the quality of it's good. So what I've done is to tap into that concept, the business of running the project, and really push that concept. And it took time, but we're now at a point where we're going, yeah, the PM can't be accountable for that, because they don't have the right skill set, right? So it is a big struggle, without question. So the project can succeed, but if the product falls apart, that's a different problem. And it's not about firing somebody, it's about working with the right department to correct that situation. Because to work with me, because testing didn't get executed well, is going to be relatively ineffective. You need to work with the testing team. So make sure the accountabilities are where they belong. So that answer your question?
I think that leads to the command and control structures and the sort of the bad PM experiences, because
Yes.
the PM has that fear of project failures. They go try to fix it.
Yeah, I gotta do whatever, I gotta be the hero. It's a hero mentality, right? I gotta do whatever needs to be done to make sure this project succeeds. If I gotta stay up all night and do the code or test the code or write a design, fine, I'll do it, right? Because I wanna succeed. I wanna be really, really good, right? That's not success. Taking your team and inspiring them to be really, really good, to do what they're good at, is your job as a manager, right? The business of running the project, right? It's all this stuff I keep hearing at Agile conferences, right? It's right on the title of Mary's book. Results are not the point. It's the people, right? So get them to do it. Make sure they have the accountability. It's amazing what happens. Good question. Other questions, thoughts? Horror stories? Anybody got a good PM horror story? I love those. No?
Yeah, we had crossed wires once where I was supposed to sit here and see this, but this was never that.
But you made it happen. You were agile.
I made
Love
it happen.
Yes, yes. Next one?
I don't have a PM horror story. I have some good stories, but what I wanted to ask you was, it seems like we've been on a journey in the Agile world, industry programming, 2001, or earlier than that actually, and it seemed like Agile was about self-organizing teams. We don't need managers, we don't need BAs, we don't need testers, in fact, on industry programming teams. We're self-organizing and we can figure it out. And now what I'm seeing is the switch towards, oh, there's a role for the BA on an Agile team, there's a role for you, who's your experienced person on an Agile team, there's a role for a project manager on an Agile team. And at the same time, we're hearing diluting of Agile values and principles, and a movement away from kind of what was potentially some of the core Agile principles around really great quality code. We're now into potentially a dilution of Agile principles. And I'm wondering whether what your feeling is, as we expand the tent to include other disciplines, are we actually watering down what Agile is all about?
Good question. So for people in the back, really what the question here is, because as we move forward and Agile is becoming more mainstream and more companies are making use of Agile, like ours, right? We get all these extra disciplines now coming into it. So it's no longer a couple developers doing and the business working, or their customer working through it and developing and testing and so on. Okay? We've got all these other disciplines. So we're becoming watered down because we could now have a BA and an SA and a developer and a tester and so on. I don't actually believe that our mix right here is the optimal mix. I think we have too much on the analysis side, right? I couldn't take them out of their comfort zone too quick, right? So I'm taking it one step at a time. Do I believe this is the right model? No. I believe this does water it down. I believe there's too much waterfall still inherent in what's going on, right? I think we have to be very careful about that. Kind of like from a project management point of view, yeah, okay, in this project, I was managing the day-to-day activities. What I would rather have is somebody in the role of somebody like a Scrum Master. Weren't doing Scrum, but somebody in that kind of role who is managing the day-to-day activities. Because quite frankly, having somebody like me working with these people is not as effective. I think that watered it down some, right? Because I'm not as technical, I'm not as close to what's going on. So I think to answer your question, yes, I think so. I think we're starting, because Agile is becoming more mainstream. You know, there was a Gartner study I read about recently that said by 2012, 80% of software development will be Agile, right? Now, when it's Gartner, because they said it, has a chance of being true. That aside, right? So a whole bunch of managers are now looking at it going, we better go Agile, right? That's going on, we just know it. Okay? But because Agile is becoming more mainstream, bigger and bigger companies are starting to make use of it. And I think there's a transitional phase we're going through. I know we're going through it at Home Hardware, trying to find that balance. But I think to answer your question, I think it is getting watered down. Right? I think we're struggling with it. My hope for Home Hardware, you know, that's where I have to worry about most, right? My hope is that we can grab onto these Agile principles, right, and the behaviors and everything else that comes with it, and change the way we develop software at Home Hardware. Will we go to Scrum? I don't know. My hope is down the road that we'll have a more optimal mix, and it'll be more aligned with the Agile principles. Will it ever be perfect? Anybody got a perfect situation? I'm not sure. It's a good question. Any other thoughts towards this?
Well, I might say that the roles that are getting pulled into the process now are they themselves trying to adapt. I think that they're probably still trying to apply their old way of working in this new world, and they still have time to work through that and figure out how that function differently.
Yeah, it was interesting. I agree, because when I started this project up, my systems analyst came in and he says, hey Mike, you know, you have 10 days up there for me to do my job. I can't do it in that kind of time. I need more, because he was still thinking waterfall, right? And I'm like, well, how much more? And he says, well, probably more like 14 or 15 days. I said, not acceptable, 10, right? I really pushed it, and then I'll be honest, I was pushing it for the sake of pushing it to see how far he would go. And he came back a day later and he says, well, yeah, I got it down some, and I said, great, what do you at? He said, 13, no, 10, right? And I went through several iterations of that, and I continued to work with him and push him. It wasn't quite so blunt, right? I was actually working with him. And in the end, he came back with something which was beautiful, 6 days. And the way he got from that was from the traditional waterfall kind of thinking, is I'm gonna create this big design document, toss it over the wall and wait a couple days, and that kind of thing, is he actually set up daily 15-minute stand-ups with the review team. And every day he'd say, okay, here's what we've changed in this document today. Any feedback? Okay, here's what I'm gonna do tomorrow. 15 minutes a day. So he took it from that 15 down to 6. So work with them, get them to be creative, help drive them towards the goals that need to be met. It's still waterfall in the sense that, it was a document we had to build and toss over the wall. But it was interesting that even the team broke that down by the time we got out here. Right? Design and development happened concurrently. Not a good mix, but we saw huge improvement. Other thoughts? Good. Well, thank you very much again for sitting here and listening to me. I do appreciate it. And enjoy the rest of the conference if you're coming back tomorrow. Thank you.